Nope,
Yeah.
totally here with you. But moving on, as we are basically doing every week moving forward. Last week we did the quarterbacks in terms of the world of fantasy football. If you want to hear our quarterback talks, I highly recommend going back and watching that. A little bit of a long one. We went in some pretty high end depth, and again, for us, since this is the first year that we're really kind of doing this, it's kind of being used as a little bit of a tester week in, week out. But this week we are talking about our running backs, and running backs are kind of your meat and potatoes of the fantasy world, of where they can be fantasy winners, but it's definitely not the premier position in fantasy anymore like it used to be, because wide receivers are now that kind of market where it's taken over, but running backs are still very, very important. So kind of the thing that we're going here with today is we're going to be talking about our individual top 10 guys that we think you should be targeting in fantasy football. We have a couple of guys that we think you should avoid at all costs, either at their ADP or just in general, and some sleepers that we potentially like.
Yeah, 100%. You know, we felt like last week with the top 20 for the quarterbacks, it got a little bit muddy near the end. And so that's why we've shrunk it down. We're more going to be focusing in on who you should be, like, these are guys you should be trying to get for your RB1 position. They should be your starting running back throughout the season aside from their bye week. These are the guys you should be targeting. And yeah, like you said, the mentions of guys you might want to avoid, it's going to be, you don't, if you can get them later than their ADP, they might be worth it, but there's going to be some reasons that we'll give for why you might want to avoid them at a high pick or as your premier RB1.
Exactly. So we should probably go from number 1 to number 10.
Like we did last week. I think number one is going to be cut and dried.
It
You
is
know,
clearly Nick Chubb.
yeah, 100%.
It is, yeah. No, I think number 1 for us is, and number 1 for most people probably wouldn't come as a little bit of a shock. It's Christian McCaffrey. I will say with Christian McCaffrey though, there does need to be a little bit of an asterisk beside him going little. There needs to be caution with Christian McCaffrey, and the reason why I think there should be caution is he has over 2,000 career rushing attempts in the NFL. He's 29 years old.
Mhm.
There's a lot of tread on that is lost off of that tire. That offensive line for the 49ers is not as stellar. I think by the end of the year he's probably going to be closer to RB4 or 5, but what we've seen from Christian McCaffrey is just a guy that you can't really pass up on him here at the
Yeah.
moment, just because he is still part of that Kyle Shanahan offense. He's still one of the premier backs. He's one of the best receiving backs in the
Mhm.
entire NFL. He's a guy that you have to target.
Well, yeah, and I mean, since coming from Carolina, he has been lights out. He had a lot of injury issues in Carolina. There was a bit of a gasp last year because he started fighting with a bit of minor injuries, but it didn't expand into anything great. So if he can remain healthy again, we saw last season he was pretty much 100-yard, one touchdown per game player. Like you could rely on him for over 20 fantasy points week in and week out.
Yeah.
And for that reason, I'm a little surprised to see his ADP at number one. Like he is the number one guy off the board. I would say like if you can get him, like if you've got the first pick, it's going to be hard to pick him because there are other options, especially at that wide receiver spot that might net you more points, but you're not going to be making a mistake by taking him first overall either. If you can get him anywhere after the third pick, you grab him
I
because that is a steal anywhere after number three, in my opinion.
Yeah, I was gonna say 4 or 5 to me would be the range of where I would happily pick him. And again, last year I had the opportunity to pick him at number 4. I chose to
Yep.
pass on him because
Yep.
Justin Jefferson was there. And you know, there
Yeah,
there
our
are
league was a little bit weird for sure.
yeah, and it was that kind of weird spot. But yeah, Christian McCaffrey, the fact that he's number one overall, I kind of looked at and went, maybe we should temper that just a little bit. I think
Right.
4 or 5 is like, if you have the 4 or 5 spot there and he's available, you got to pull that trigger,
Oh, 100%.
unless for instance there's someone where you are just so completely, like for instance, if Justin Jefferson is there, it's gonna be a hard decision between both of those two guys, and it's really just, do you have a good feel of your depth in terms of wide receivers,
Hmm.
or do you feel like you can potentially get another one of these running backs?
Yeah, and I think a big reason why McCaffrey is that number one ADP is because his situation has sort of stayed the same. Like you said, the offensive line got a little bit weaker for them, but ultimately, you still have George Kittle, who's one of the best blocking tight ends. He's still got a great situation. Whereas you see guys like Justin Jefferson, who now does not have a premier quarterback throwing him the ball.
He didn't
You
have a
know, you
premier
wonder if
quarterback for
Ty.
most of the year last year anyways.
Well, yeah, but at the start of the year, you were
He
looking at Kirk Cousins, Justin Jefferson. Justin
getting
Jefferson
150
was
yards a game and 2 TDs types.
exactly. He was the clear
Exactly.
number one at that point.
Yeah.
Whereas you look at it going, okay, catching passes from Sam Darnold, is he going to be able to do the same sort of thing? You know,
Totally.
and then
Totally.
Tyreek Hill as well. You sort of wonder at some point the wheels are going to fall off there. He's not going to be able to be doing the same thing week in, week out. And so that's why I think Christian McCaffrey is in that number one spot because of guys like Justin Jefferson taking a bit of a drop off. CeeDee Lamb, you know, we talked about it. He's going to be double teamed a lot this year, much like Tyreek Hill. And so I think that's sort of the concern is, at least with Christian McCaffrey, we know he's going to be the feature back. He's going to be in there pretty much every snap of the game. He's
He's
going
going
to
to get a
also be
lot
catching
of one-on-one
passes,
matchups.
right? He's going to be catching passes out of the backfield. So you've got that point per reception addition, as well as the receiving yards, the rushing yards, the touchdowns, both sides of it. And he has been very good at protecting the ball. We don't see him fumble it a lot.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
for me, in terms of the running backs this year, I have a 1A, 1B, and even a 1C, because I think the top 3 running backs, or at least on my list, are pretty interchangeable. And the reason why I have McCaffrey in that as
Mhm.
that 1A is just because of that age and, the
Yeah.
potential risk of injury, and the two guys that I have behind him, my 1B and 1C, are guys that I think I
Mhm.
might consider even going after one of those guys ahead of Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, that's where you and I differ. Like if McCaffrey's there, he is uh, hands down my RB1. I have a feeling we probably have the same guy sitting at number two, but I think the third, I have a feeling the guy you have at three, I dropped a little bit further down my list just for reasons that we'll discuss when we get there.
I'm curious to see who you have at number 2.
Number two is I have the guy who led the league last year in fantasy points, and that's Brees Hall.
Yeah.
You know, he's got Aaron Rodgers coming back. He was able to do some fantastic things without Aaron Rodgers last year. If Rodgers can stay healthy, I think the ceiling for Brees Hall is just so high, and he has the opportunity to take that number one running back spot away from Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, I exact same thing here. Brees Hall again,
Yeah.
and Brees Hall, and the statement that I made a little bit earlier of why I think I potentially might take my 1B or 1C guy over Christian McCaffrey is because I really do look at Brees Hall and go, he was the number one fantasy point getter last year
Yeah.
on that Jets offense that, let's be honest here, was pretty stale with their rotating door of quarterbacks.
Hmm.
Garrett Wilson was really the only other guy out there that was actually doing anything on the offensive side of the ball. But they're getting Aaron Rodgers back. They beefed up their offensive line from the tackle position. And
Yep.
to me, like he is one of those guys where if he finds a hole, he's going to exploit it. He's going to explode through, and no one's going to catch him.
Yeah.
He is just one of those guys. And then the fact of what he can do with the ball, in the air, out of the backfield as well. He is just one of those dynamic guys. And coming off of that torn ACL the year prior to, the dude didn't look like he missed a beat. And
Mhm.
yeah, again, right now,
He,
if you're at that 4 or 5 spot and Christian McCaffrey is gone, you have to pull the trigger on him.
oh, 100%. And yeah, his ADP right now is number 5. He's ranked at number 5. And yeah, like that, his first cut is one of the smoothest first cuts that I have seen in close to 20 years. Like the only guy that comes to mind for me is like LaDainian Tomlinson. That first move out of the backfield, it's so smooth, it's so quick, like, and it looks so effortless by Breece Hall,
Yeah.
and it's dangerous. And that's just it. Whether Aaron Rodgers makes it past 3 snaps or not, Breece Hall is still going to be a fantasy stud this year.
You want to know the funny part is that the guy that
I
tore Aaron
know.
Rodgers' Achilles, Leonard Floyd, is playing
Yep.
against him in week number 1 on
Right.
primetime football. It's literally the NFL is like, okay, old man, don't do it this time.
Right.
Or
And Leonard Floyd's looking at it going, how's that other Achilles feeling there, Aaron?
You know
I'll
that
come for the other
meme
one.
of that old white guy standing outside of the window going, "You are mine." Someone said Leonard Floyd when he sees week 1 primetime against Aaron Rodgers, and I just started pissing myself going like, yeah, like they're literally scripting it up to have the exact
Yep.
same thing. And let's just see if Aaron survives it.
Yeah. Yeah, good luck. I mean, that last year it wasn't even against like it was against a really good defense, don't get me wrong.
Oh yeah.
But the San Francisco 49ers defense is way better, and they added Leonard Floyd to that,
Yeah.
who is going to be looking at Aaron Rodgers going, I'm going to get you again. And if,
Leonard Floyd is an 8+ sack guy a year.
right?
Former 9th overall pick.
Yep.
Very, very talented guy. Knows Aaron Rodgers quite well because he faced him twice a year for his first 5 seasons of his career.
Yep.
Playing in Chicago.
And let's be real, if he can't get there, you got to remember, you got Bosa on the other side. Yeah. It's going to be a rough week 1 for Aaron Rodgers coming back.
Yeah, but yeah, we're consensus 1-2, Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall. I know you said you might have a difference of opinion in your number 3.
Yes.
So please take us through your number 3 running back.
Well, I have a feeling I know who your number 3 is, but my number 3 is a guy who is he's always been high on my list. He's just been in a shitty situation, and he is going into one of the best run offenses in the league, and that's Saquon Barkley. He's been a top pick for me even when he was with the Giants because he was carrying the workload there. He's going to the Eagles now, who have a great offensive line, who are set up for a power running back, and they've been using guys like DeAndre Swift, who are more agile out of the backfield. I think Saquon Barkley is going to come in this year and just absolutely dominate in terms of the amount of yards he puts up and his touchdowns especially. His ADP right now is sitting at about 13, so early second round, which I agree with. I probably won't reach to take him in the first round. If I miss out on McCaffrey or Hall, I'll probably end up just filling up with wide receivers in that first round instead. But Saquon Barkley, he's going to be hard to pass up on. And, if you're worried about the depth at running back going further into rounds, don't be afraid to reach on him and take him with picks 6 through 10.
Yeah. For me, I have Saquon Barkley a little bit farther down on the list, but pretty much every single reason that you named there is a damn good reason, because he really went from a team last year where he was my number 1 running back, and he was the only person on that Giants offense. Now he's going to an Eagles offense that has an offensive line who, like what you said, can do that power run, and then they also have the wide receivers and Jalen Hurts there. The threat of Jalen Hurts also in the backfield, it's one of those things where you just go, oh my god. He's going to be very, very good. The guy that I have third on my list is Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yep, that's exactly who I thought you would have there.
The reason why I have Jahmyr Gibbs is because when you look at the running backs that are the top guys. It's the guys that are both going to get you a ton of rushing yards, a ton of
Mhm.
rushing touchdowns, but also in the receiving game. And like, what do we talk about with Christian McCaffrey? He's one of those
Yep.
guys that can get you 1,000 rushing, 1,000 receiving, and he's going to get you 10 rushing touchdowns, probably another 6 or 7 receiving touchdowns as well. Just he's just an ultimate threat. And when you look at Jahmyr Gibbs, he is the exact prototype of that type of back where he's shifty enough, he's speedy enough out of the backfield with the ball in his hands. He's kind of that next level Le'Veon Bell where he's patient with the ball in the backfield, he catches the ball, and he's just such a threat. And I think last year the Lions, they used him pretty sparingly in the opening stages of the season, and there was a lot of criticisms from myself going, why aren't you using him? You drafted him with a top 15 pick. And then they finally started using him, and it was like, oh, okay, yeah, he's definitely one of the best fantasy running backs in the entire NFL. And I think he's only going to get a bigger workload this particular season. And for me, I just go, you add in the receiving
Mhm.
with the rushing, he is going to be so much fun to watch. And I look at it, and again, I go, if you are looking at Christian McCaffrey as your number one, I look at Jahmyr Gibbs and I go, he is the second best to Christian McCaffrey in terms of getting those points, because he is so similar to a Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree with everything you said there. Jahmyr Gibbs, he would be excellent in a keeper league as well. The he's on my list. I did drop him down a few spots. The reason for that is that I'm concerned, much like last year, David Montgomery is going to be stealing some of those snaps, especially short yardage and red zone situations, which will likely temper how many touchdowns Jahmyr Gibbs is able to get. He will break you for some big gains, but
You're
once
not
you're in the red
necessarily going to be
zone
getting the
and
touchdown numbers
well,
from
yeah,
him. Yeah.
it's that red zone and that short yardage where they seem to be more confident in handing the ball off to David Montgomery, letting him pound the rock up the middle, which is fair. That's a legitimate game plan.
Yep.
And so that's the only reason that Jahmyr Gibbs dropped a little bit down my list. He's still very much in my top 10. You know, I've got him at that sixth ranked spot for myself, but and that's really the only reason. As soon as David Montgomery is gone, Jahmyr Gibbs to me is the next Christian McCaffrey. When he is the feature back and he is in there every snap of the game, he is going to be putting up the same numbers that we see Christian McCaffrey putting up.
Yeah. And I'm not as worried about that. Is the simple reason for me is I just look at it and go, he is going to, I think with the confidence of him being in year number 2, and I think he's just going to be able to find those extra explosive plays where he is going to get touchdowns, but they're just going to be long touchdowns. He might not have as many
Yeah.
touchdowns as David Montgomery at the end of the season, but the touchdowns that he's going to get you are going to be like 12-point touchdowns, because it's going to be like
Yeah.
50 plus yards either receiving or just a rush, and he gets into the end zone. He's just one of those big play guys. So,
Yeah.
and but yeah, and I looked at the ADP for Jahmyr Gibbs at 13. Again, for me, I'm looking at it going like that. To me, is a massive steal if you can get him at the early stages of round 2.
Oh yeah.
I'm one of those guys where if I hold pick number 6, my top 3 wide receivers are gone, and and for instance Christian McCaffrey and Breece Hall are gone, I'm taking Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yeah.
If I'm spot number 6 and it's that situation, I'm not hesitating. No question about it.
Yeah. No, that is perfectly fair. And again, you know, we are planning on doing a keeper league. I've sort of done my list for a 1 year league because
That's how I've built mine as well.
yeah, because I mean, honestly, for a 1 year league, I would be taking Saquon Barkley. In our keeper league, if I'm in that situation that you just mentioned, I'm taking Jahmyr Gibbs as well,
Yeah.
because I've got him going forward when David Montgomery leaves that Detroit Lions team.
Yep, and so number 4, I think this is going to be a little bit interesting.
Yep.
I think we might have the same, but we could definitely also have this. We could start entering some Wild West territory here.
I think yeah, this 4 through 10 is going to be a little bit more messy. For myself, I looked at more of the guys who are going to be filling that feature back role as opposed to anybody who has a great
Teammate
second
around
option
him.
behind them.
Yep.
And so my number 4 is a guy who missed the beginning of last season. Um, Indianapolis Colts running back Jonathan Taylor. He put up some great numbers, and we saw him, and we talked about him last year. If he was there the whole time, he's got this makeup that you feel like you're watching a young Derrick Henry when you watch Jonathan Taylor, because he's tough, he's strong, he's fast, and he just bulls his way through. And so I've got Jonathan Taylor there because I think this Colts team is going to rely heavily on the running game, heavily on the play action pass, because they've got that more mobile style of quarterback.
Yeah, I love JT. He's one of my
Yep.
favorite backs in the entire NFL. Um, he is definitely lower on my list. I think there are guys that are ahead of him, and my worry with this Colts offense is there's a lot of young pieces here at the moment, and I
hmm
think with JT, obviously with Anthony Richardson being there as the quarterback, we don't know how durable he is going to be, and Adonai Mitchell and their receiving game. So there's going to be some mouths to feed there in the receiving game, and I think
Yep.
they're really going to want to showcase Anthony Richardson to the NFL early on and say, listen, I know we had his injury history last year, but he is this guy, and I think the early stages of the year, I think you're going to see a little bit less from JT, just because I think the Colts are going to want to almost kind of present their shiny new quarterback that's not so new out to the league and go like, listen, this is our guy. Uh, and I think more teams are going to say to some of these younger weapons, you're going to have to prove that you're going to be able to beat us, and we're going
Yeah.
to start stacking the box a little bit more with JT because we know he's a proven guy that can be an absolute weapon. But yeah, I love JT, man. Love him.
Yeah, see, I just looked at it and I feel like that's what the Colts were kind of forced to do last year because they didn't have JT at the start of the season. And so they had to rely heavily
Zach Moss.
on Richardson because they weren't sure what they had with Zach Moss at that point. And
That's
so
fair.
they were
Yep.
relying so heavily on Richardson and it resulted in injuries. So I think they might take an opposite approach going, we've got Taylor here this year. We signed him to the contract he wanted. He's happy now. Let's preserve our quarterback to start the year, build him in slowly. Let's let Jonathan Taylor run this offense and then slowly add the pieces in with the youth at quarterback and wide receiver that we've got. I think that's what we're going to see more out of the Colts offense this year is it's going to be heavy on Jonathan Taylor until the teams are stopping him. I do agree that a lot of those defenses are going to look to stack the box against him, but we've seen even with those stacked boxes, sometimes he just bulls his way right through anyway.
Yep.
And if you can't stop him from gaining more than 4 yards per carry, I see no reason why the Colts should go away from him.
I totally agree. Yeah, for me he's just a little bit farther down on the list, but again,
That's fair.
like I look at his ADP and where they have him as 12.
Yep.
I'm a little bit more concerned with that just because I think there's more value with some other guys. If he's there in the early stages of the third and he's up there and I only have one running back, or let's say I don't have a starting running back at that point, I would be really comfortable grabbing him. But I think
Mhm.
he's a late second, early third round running back pick in your fantasy league. That's just kind of where I look at it. And I think
That's fair.
12 might just be a little too rich for my blood.
Yeah, early second round. And that's sort of where I view Barkley, Taylor, Gibbs is that early second round, and that's just it. You need a solid RB1.
Yes.
Everybody's got their own preferences, what they like for play style. Barkley and Taylor are feature back, ground and pound style guys, so you're going to get a lot of carries, a lot of ground yards. You're not going to get a lot of receptions, no PPR, whereas Gibbs is going to give you that upside to the PPR. So yeah,
Yep.
it's definitely something to weigh, but yeah, those guys sitting at that like 12, 13, 14 is where they're ranked. I early second round for those three for me, I agree with.
Yeah. For me at my fourth running back spot, this is another kind of more featured back guy, and
Mhm.
that's Bijan Robinson. Bijan Robinson, he's getting a hell of an upgrade in terms of the offensive staff that is coming his way, and
Mhm.
Kirk Cousins. And we know Bijan Robinson can be a dynamo in terms of the rushing game, but he's also very effective in the pass game as well. He's more known as a rusher as opposed to a pass catcher, but
Yeah.
he's going to be still used heavily. And I think for him, the amount of weapons that are on that Atlanta team are going to help him,
Mhm.
because it's going to be a situation of, okay, they have a quarterback that can actually hit the wide receivers in the hand. So we can't just stack the box and go, okay, we know even if we don't get to your quarterback in Desmond Ritter, even if he's able to throw the ball, it's not necessarily going to get to the receiver because of the way that Desmond Ritter throws the ball. Kirk Cousins, he's going to be able to hit it. And I just think that's going to open up more space for Bijan Robinson to run the ball. And I just feel a little bit more confident with him there. And looking at his ADP, they have him as 8. I think that's a little too high for him. Again, I view Bijan more in that early to mid second round. He's kind of that second tier of running back in my opinion, because obviously McCaffrey, Hall, and Gibbs are my tier one. They are the clear cut tier ones for me, and Bijan is the top of that tier two.
Yeah, I had a hard time with Bijan Robinson. He busted hard last year, and I know that was in large part due to Arthur Smith's offense, but it's got me gun shy, honestly. Bijan dropped all the way to my 10th. He was the last guy on my list. I included him there because I feel like the upside is there. Like he could have a career year, but I look back at Atlanta and I remember Kyle Pitts.
Yep.
And I'm like, he was a, talked about as a big name guy,
Year
multiple
in,
years,
year out.
and he
Yep.
busted every year. And I'm concerned with Bijan Robinson.
And
So
I think you
I
have
look
the rights to be concerned with that for sure. Yep.
right, and that's the only reason he dropped to my 10th. Like if all the other guys are gone from that list, he is a great upside RB1 if you can get him. I don't think I would take him until probably the 4th round myself.
Hmm.
But that's and unless there's like a run on running backs and all the guys you like are already gone, then grab Bijan Robinson because with that Kirk Cousins addition, that does bode well for him having a much better year this year.
Yeah.
And it's just that's all it is. It was so hard for me because I wanted to put him higher, but I also just don't trust
You
him
have
yet.
that Atlanta Falcons stank with,
Yeah,
the Kyle Pitts. I get that one, and he is
yeah,
one of those guys where, again, I kind of have that asterisk, but
yeah.
I feel like with the Kyle Pitts situation that you're bringing up, that was more of an Arthur Smith situation, and I
100%.
think the new offensive coordinator and the new
Mhm.
offensive staff that are in there are going to go, we're not going to use these guys as decoys because
Yeah,
that's stupid.
yeah,
They are
yeah. And I feel
super
like
talented, so we're going to use them.
yeah. I feel like that's what Bijan Robinson is looking to. We're gonna see a better year out of him. It's that Atlanta Falcons stank, as you put it. I have a hard time trusting it, whereas the guys I've mentioned thus far and all the rest on my list, I can look at and I go, I know if they are healthy, they are going to produce.
Yeah.
Whereas Bijan Robinson, like, even if he's healthy, with Kirk Cousins and the other weapons that are there, we could still see him be tempered a little bit because guys like Kyle Pitts and Drake London are gonna have big years instead. And so that's where I'm not sure what that Atlanta offense is going to look like. So I have trouble ranking those guys too high.
Totally. And I get that one. I
Yeah.
think I'm a little bit higher on Bijan just because I know there's that stank around, but
Mhm.
I'm just a little bit more confident that they're going to be able to kind of wipe that clean a little bit.
Yeah.
Moving over to our 5th running backs. For me, I had Saquon Barkley. That's where I had him. I know you had him at your number 3 spot. I had him at my
Yeah.
number 5. We already talked about him, but who is your number 5 running back?
My number 5 is the guy who I had as my RB1 last season, And I reached on him last year, and I know a lot of you guys were all like, why are you taking him? And that's Travis Etienne Jr. And he had a lights out year for the first 3 quarters of the season and then started struggling with injuries. If not for those injuries, I think he would have been one of the top 3 running backs at the end of the year. And so that's why he's still in the top 5 for me. His ADP right now is 18, so late second rounder. I believe I did take him last year.
I think
think
you
it
took him
was
early third.
third round.
Yeah.
I believe it was third round that I took him, maybe even fourth. But yeah, he's just lights out. He's got that multiple attack ability. He can catch out of the backfield. He'll get you a lot of receiving yards that way, a lot of receptions, and he's great as a running back as well. And this is a big year for Trevor Lawrence. He's got to prove himself. So this Jags team really is going to be on the hot seat, looking to impress. And I think Etienne, if he can stay healthy, is likely going to be on track to have another big fantasy year.
Yeah, Travis Etienne. He's my number 6 back. So not a terrible amount of difference between where you had him rated and where I had him rated.
Mhm.
And if you remember when we go back to that draft, I was pretty much the only person going like, you son of a bitch. Like,
Yeah.
It was one of those things where everyone else was going like, oh, you could have had him in like the 7th round. And it was like, no, he got him at a fucking great spot. And
Yeah.
he really was. The issue for me why I have him at number 6 is because when you look at the guys like Christian McCaffrey, Jahmyr Gibbs, he's in that similar vein of where he's a receiving back, but he's also very shifty and he can be explosive with the ball in the run game. When we talked about Bijan Robinson and that kind of stank on him, I almost kind of have that little bit of a situation with the Jags, for instance. And it's because when you watched the Jags with the first year of Doug Peterson, it was like, okay, they took a step, and it's like, this is what we were expecting. And then in year number 2, which was last year, we're like, okay, we're going to see Trevor Lawrence and that Jags offense go from being great or good to being great.
Yep.
And it just never happened. And
Well-
Travis Etienne, he was good, and we know there was the injuries, and you and I have talked about this, but it was one of those things where I just looked at it and went, we have seen teams with injuries still be able to take that step from being good to being great, and we just didn't see that from them. And so I have that little bit more of a caution, just going like, okay, if a player gets hurt, is this offense just simply going to start to stall and go back to what we saw from last year? And if that's the case, Travis Etienne, he's still going to be one of the best guys in my tier number 2.
Yep.
But he's going to be one of those guys where I'm not going to feel comfortable, for instance, drafting him at 18. For me, I look at Travis Etienne and I go, he's an early 3rd round pick, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I mean, that 18, that's very late 2nd round, verging on the early 3rd round. Yep. So I think that's fair for him. The only argument I will make is that for the first part of that season last year, they were see the Jags become great. They took that step. And as you pointed out, though, once the injuries hit, they regressed back to that good. And so that is their next step, is they need to go back to that greatness. And then when they have the adversity, they have to remain there.
Yeah.
That is going to be the true test this year, is we saw that you have the ability to be great when you're healthy, but you're going to face adversity at some point. You need to still be able to
when the bullets start to get fired, are you still going to be cool, calm, and collected? And can you perform your task at the highest level? And that is a statement that you made. I 100% completely agree on. They did look like they were going to be great. But as I said, the truly great offenses, when they do have that adversity, it doesn't change.
I still disagree with that. I mean, look at the 49ers. When they started having some injury issues last year, they struggled. That's when they started losing their games.
Yep.
When you lose your stars, you're going to have a drop off.
Oh,
you still have to find a way to win.
Yeah, and that's for me the biggest thing where I'm looking at in terms of the Jags difference to what the 49ers. The 49ers, they did have that drop off, and it was without a doubt a concern. But they were still looking good. They were still competing, while the Jags Yeah, while the Jags, it was just kind of it was red alarm here, siren over here. It was a nuclear missile. While the
Mhm.
49ers, it was okay. We're not happy. We
Yeah,
instead of our smiley faces, we have frowny faces.
yeah,
That's the difference between it. And you look at the Chiefs, for instance, when players like their guys go down, like Travis Kelsey, when he
hmm,
wasn't playing at his top level because he was hurt. It was instead of the happy faces, it was we have a frowny face, and we're
yeah.
still an elite offense, and that's where I think a lot of us expected the Jags to go to, and we need to see that step up this year, and that's kind of why I have Travis Etienne at my sixth spot.
That is fair. Yeah, that is completely fair.
So we already talked about my fifth guy, Saquon. We
Yep.
talked about my sixth guy in Travis Etienne. So number six for
Well,
you,
we've
good sir.
we've talked about my sixth guy because that's where I dropped Jameer Gibbs too.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, and that was a tough one because ETN and Gibbs were like right on par with each other for myself. I waffled on which one to put five, which one to put six. I went with ETN because, like I said, I had him last year. I saw what he can do for me, and so I was just a little more comfortable there. And he's also the feature guy. He's not going to be sharing a lot of the snaps as
Totally.
opposed to Jameer Gibbs going to be sharing with David Montgomery.
Totally agree. And but yeah, it's kind of funny how I had Jameer Gibbs last year, and I saw what he
Mhm.
was able to do. You had Travis
Yep.
Etienne, and it's a kind of a little bit of a tale of two worlds of where
Yep.
Travis Etienne was brilliant to start the year. Jameer Gibbs very slow. At the end of the year, Travis Etienne not very good. Jameer
Nope.
Gibbs very good,
Yep.
very good.
Oh yeah.
You're number seven, my good sir.
So seven, that's where I threw Kyron Williams. We didn't see him in the first half of last year, but once he joined that Rams team and they started giving him the ball, he was lights out. He was putting up fantastic fantasy numbers, tons of yards, touchdowns, game in, game out. I think we're gonna see big, big things from him. He also the sort of a flip flop on me on this one. I've got him at number seven. His ADP is sitting at 15. I like the idea of taking him late second round, early third round, but he is also on my notable mentions list to maybe be wary of and maybe avoid simply because the Rams did draft Blake Corum. And so if that was more of an insurance policy, then you're good to go on Kyron Williams. If they're going to start splitting snaps between those two guys, that is going to drastically hurt Kyron Williams' fantasy output. I'm hoping for the former that they brought Blake Corum in because they know it's a physical division in that NFC West. They know there's going to be guys banged up, and Kyron Williams might not be able to play the whole season. And then they've got a guy in Blake Corum that they can plug in there. So we'll see what happens. But Kyron Williams, based on what he did last year, based on how good I think he can be, he deserves to be a top 10 and he deserves to be considered for your RB1.
Yeah, Kyron Williams, I also have in my top 10. I have him as my eighth spot in this
Yep.
list. For me, I look at him and I go, he just came out of nowhere last year. And it was one of those things where even when he was still playing lights out, it's not like he was on any of our radars until the end of the season where we all kind of went like, who's this Kyron Williams guy who just casually had 1,000 yards without anyone talking about him? He was
Mm-hmm.
kind of like the best kept secret. And I think teams are also going to have this thing this year where they're going to look at him and say, listen, no one knew about you last year. No one was
Mm-hmm.
going into the week going, okay, we have to game plan for this guy. Everyone last year was like, oh, this Kyron Williams guy, what's his stat? Like he got 100 yards last game. It's against that team, whatever. So we'll be able to stop him. And I don't think anyone necessarily took him as seriously as they probably should have. I think this year he's definitely going to be viewed as a little bit more, and I still think he's going to be very good. Sean McVay, one of the very best offensive minds in the game of football, so he's going to find a way to get him open. But I also like what you said with Blake Corum, where it's
Yep.
we know what Blake Corum was at Michigan. He was a touchdown a game type player. He was in a split backfield with Donovan Edwards, and it was you couldn't keep Blake Corum off of the field. And that is going to be one of those things where I think it's going to ultimately affect Kyron Williams. Maybe not to start the year. I think after like week 4 going into week 5, Blake Corum is one of those guys where he's just going to start demanding snaps because whenever he gets it, he's just looks so damn good out there. But I still think Kyron Williams has to be a top 10 guy just because, for playing half a year and getting 1,000 yards, that you just can't argue against that.
And I mean, teams can talk about game planning for him all they want too, but
you have to go.
They're only going to be able to do so much. You still got Matt Stafford throwing the ball to Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp.
Yep.
You're only going to be able to do so much. And I would not be at all surprised to see Sean McVay incorporating a 2-back system this year to give Blake Corum as many touches. I sort of looked at Blake Corum and I'm like, he might have that Jahmyr Gibbs style rise next year where he's not going to be big in the start of the year. But as soon as they give him the ball a couple of times, and they see what he can do, they might go, I know Kyron Williams is good, but every time we hand it to Blake, he's getting in the end zone.
Yeah.
So we kind of got to ride that hot hand. So that's where I was a little concerned. Kyron Williams is the only guy on my top 10 that I say temper your expectations a little bit because he might lose snaps to the incoming rookie.
I also really don't like the ADP for Kyron Williams at 15. I'm talking about guys like Travis Etienne being early 3rd round picks. Yep. I definitely see Kyron Williams being a early 4th round type of guy. Again, he is my 8th guy, and we'll talk about my 7th guy up here in a moment. But
Yep.
just to finish off with Kyron Williams, if he's there in the 4th round, and I definitely view him more as your running back option number 2. If you haven't gotten your running back number 1 yet, and Kyron Williams is there, I don't think you're necessarily going to be too thrilled with that, but you're going to be okay. Like you're gonna have yourself a good back.
Yeah, and I feel like that ADP of his is a little bit inflated. It's almost like some of the people that are, because the ADP is generated by people doing mock drafts.
Yes.
And I think some people don't know about Blake Corum, and that's why Kyron Williams is going so high. Because if Blake Corum is not on that Rams team, then yes, Kyron Williams is top 2 to 3 rounds. You want to get him because he's going to be a feature pack.
Yeah.
With Corum there, that's going to draw some of the snaps away from him.
Yep, great conversation, but he's still both in our top 10. Number 7 for you, number 8 for me. My 8th running back happens to be the king, Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry, I think he's kind of being forgot about a little bit this year, but he's going to the team that I know basically every AFC North fan out there said, please, for the love of God, do not go to this team. And that's the Baltimore Ravens, because Baltimore, they have a good offensive line. They know how to help running backs get open. This is the best running back Lamar Jackson has ever had. And the best part about this is he's just going to be told, just go run the ball. You don't have to do anything special. We have the 2-time MVP. We have one of the best tight ends in the game. We have some young receivers that we're really excited about. You just go out, run the ball. And do I think he's going to have a rushing title this year like we've seen in the past? No, but I could easily see him being 1,500-yard running back again. Yeah. He's going to do almost nothing in the receiving game, which is fine. Derrick Henry is just one of those guys where he is just going to get you points simply off of the rushing yards. I think maybe 7 or 8 rushing touchdowns. I think once it starts to get closer to the red zone, that's when we're going to start to see Lamar start to get a few more of those rushing touchdowns. But the duo of Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry is one that we've been kind of joking about for years of going, if those two ever got together, look the fuck out. And now that
Mhm.
they're here, it's kind of one of those things where few people are starting to sleep on the king, and the fact that he's got that ADP of 32, so they're saying
Right.
early third round. I have him in that third round ahead of Kyron Williams, and if he's there, I would consider going, like, let's say for instance I got Brees Hall in the first round and I got my number one receiver in the second round. I'd be looking
Mhm.
at Derrick Henry going, yeah, why wouldn't I take Derrick Henry as my RB number two? And if you don't have your running back yet at that point, Derrick Henry is going to be a damn good number one running back.
Oh yeah, hands down. I mean, all the way back to I think week 5 of last season, I've been going, damn it, I don't want Derrick Henry in Baltimore, because that was when the Titans were starting to sort of collapse a bit, and there was a lot of talks about, oh, are they going to trade him away? And the Ravens were one of the favorite spots. I knew if the Titans didn't trade him somewhere that signed him to a contract, he was going to be signing with Baltimore this offseason, and that's exactly what happened, much to my dismay. Um, yeah, I've got Derrick Henry in my top 10 as well. He's sitting in my 9 spot. Purely for the fact that he's going to be sharing some of those rushing yards with Lamar Jackson. That's why I had another guy just one more spot ahead of him at 8. Um, but yeah, Derrick Henry is going to be an excellent RB1. I agree. I can see him getting over 1,500 yards. I think he's probably going to break the 10 touchdown mark as well, because we talk about, getting close into that red zone that Lamar Jackson usually takes it more. Teams will be watching for that. So he'll have the opportunity to line up like he's going to run his little roll out bootleg to the end zone,
But
and
he's just gonna
instead
hand it
just
right to Derrick. Yeah.
hand it right to Derrick Henry, and then continue with that run, that bootleg out, and the defenders are going to follow him because they think he's got the ball because they're so used to it.
Yeah.
And Derrick Henry is going to be able to just walk in untouched.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it is going to be a lot of fun if you're not a fan of an NFC North team. Everyone
Yeah.
else is going to be looking at that as primetime television, just watching that duo. But yeah, that was my number 7. We talked about my number 8 running back. Who's your number 8?
Kyron Williams. My number 8, the guy who I put just above Derrick Henry because he's gonna have that feature back spot, and he's not got as mobile of his quarterback. I mean, he is a mobile quarterback, but he's not known for running it as much, and that's Josh Jacobs. He was a beast when he was in Vegas, and I think he's gonna go to Green Bay and do the exact same thing. Green Bay has been lacking a healthy, good running back for a while now. They've had great running backs, but they just haven't been able to keep them healthy. I think Josh Jacobs is going to go in there and just enjoy the fact that he can be smash mouth, run the ball in the NFC North against some tough defenses, but I think he's going to enjoy that. And so I've got Josh Jacobs sitting at my number 8 spot. His ADP right now is 23, so that's early second round. I mean, if you don't have an RB1 and you've already got your wide receiver one, then and none of these other guys we've talked about are available still, then you're going to want to grab Josh Jacobs. I'm more looking at him in the mid to late third, early fourth round.
Yeah, I don't have Josh Jacobs in my top 10. I just look at that division that the NFC North is in right now, and it's just defenses, defenses, defenses with some really good young talent. And I, with Josh Jacobs with the Raiders, he only had 2 good years. The other years were just kind of nothing seasons, or pardon me, he had 3 years of kind of nothing, and last year was kind of one of those things. It was definitely better than his second and third year as opposed to his first and fourth, but I think he's going to be good with Green Bay. It's just he's going to be more along those lines of just a ground and pound guy. And unfortunately, a lot of those guys, unless they are just the best of the best, they don't get you insane amount of fantasy numbers. I view him more as like an RB2, and he's not someone I would be ever happy with taking as my RB1. I view him definitely more as like a 5th round pick. If
Yeah.
you kind of have your RB1 set up and you're like, okay, I need an RB2 and he's going to get me 10, 15 points a week type situation. But like he's a top 15 running back in my opinion. Without a doubt, there's no questions about that. It's just I feel the division that he's playing in, the team that he's also on, where
Mhm.
they have utilized running backs in the past, but it feels like they're definitely leaning more towards Jordan Love in the passing game, which Matt LaFleur is
Yep.
definitely more known for. So that's why I kind of have him outside of this top 10, more in the top 15.
That's fair. Yeah, and I don't necessarily see him getting a ton of yards for you, but one area the Green Bay Packers struggled was with their red zone offense and getting those touchdowns once they get close to the end zone. And I think it's because they were lacking a running back that could pound the ball in. And so I think we're gonna see lower yardage,
More
but
touchdowns as opposed
a
to it, yeah.
fairly significant amount of touchdowns from Josh Jacobs because the Packers were great at getting to the red zone, and then they kept getting sort of
Fizzled out once
shot
they got there,
stopped
yeah.
back just because they Aaron Jones wasn't always able to get there. He wasn't always healthy. AJ Dillon, same sort of thing. And then when teams realized that, they were like, "Oh, we can just sort of key in on these receivers, and Jordan Love can't get it done down here."
Yeah.
So I think that's where they're going to utilize Josh Jacobs, and I think he's going to be able to put up some touchdowns for you. So yeah, I mean, if you can get him as your RB2, then hell yeah, grab him. But if you're sitting there in the third, fourth, fifth round, and again, as we've discussed, you've got a league where all these running backs we've talked about are already gone. You got a lot of guys that are running back happy, and Josh Jacobs is still sitting there. You need an RB1, and he will be serviceable if he's your last option there.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say about Josh Jacobs is he has an ADP of 23, which is one of those things that I
Yeah.
do I don't love that. Like I said, for me, he's like a 5th round back. Like he's a 5th round pick in fantasy for me. And I think we should preference we are going off of a 10-player league.
Yeah.
That's so he's kind of closer into that 50 range for me as opposed to the 23 range.
Yeah.
But yeah, my guy was Kyron Williams, for number 9.
And yep, that was where I had Derrick Henry at number 9, and number 10 I had Bijan Robinson rounding out
And
my list.
number 10, I had Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah.
So
And so I mean, for the most part, we all, we had the same guys all throughout. I had one difference in Josh Jacobs, who wasn't on your list, and you had, who was it you had that wasn't on my list?
was it Bijan?
No, no, because I have Bijan at 10.
Because I had oh wait, I forgot to have a 10th.
Oh, you don't have your 10th.
Yeah, no,
Well, there you go.
I just realized, and I know who my 10th would be in this list. Davon Achan, the Miami Dolphins running back.
Yeah.
He stepped in as a 3rd rounder last year in part of that Raheem Morris backup role. Obviously, Raheem Morris was lights out spectacular, just the amount of touchdowns that he was able to get. But when Achan got into the game, he had a very similar effect to what a Jameer Gibbs had in that
Mhm.
particular route. He was just a ton of fun to watch. He had some injuries, but it is a track team there, and there's a lot of players. So that's the reason why I kind of have him at my number 10 spot. Is there's a lot of mouths to feed in Miami, but he
Yeah.
is a very, very exciting back going into year 2 with, again, one of the youngest and most gifted play callers in the NFL in terms of the offense.
Mhm.
So I really like HN.
Yeah, that's fair. The only reason he didn't make my list was, well, I guess the two reasons he didn't was those injury issues, and then the fact that I believe Mostert is still there. So I expect them to split those touchdowns, those carries, those yards again, because yes, Mostert's going to be 32, but he led the league in touchdowns last year. How do you look at that and go, well, he's too old, but dude was
He did
still
it a
like,
year. Yep.
right? Like maybe it was just a one-off, but you can't just assume that. And I know I'm trying to remember the coach's name right now, but he
Mike
won't just
McDonald.
write that off. he's going to include him in the game plan. So that was why I didn't include Achan in there,
Yep,
just because
McDaniels is like
McDaniels.
he.
Yeah,
I think what we're going to see this year is the flip of HN being the number one and Morris
yes,
being that number two, kind of just because he does have that age. The one
yeah,
thing I will say about HN is his ADP is 19. I don't love that. I think he's closer to a fourth round pick just because again, he is potentially going to split some of those times, and there are so many mouths to feed. Obviously, you have Waddle, Tyreek Hill. Now you have Odell also in there, and Morris, who is also still going to be fighting for it, going like, I led the league in touchdowns last year. Come on, guys, what are we doing? So, but yeah,
yeah. So that rounds out our top 10. You know, these are all guys that we think you should be looking at to fill that RB1 position. Or you know, if you can grab two of these guys and have them as your 1-2 at the running back, you're
you're in
going
a
to be
happy
sitting
spot.
in a really good spot and be able to focus on rounding out your roster with a lot of wide receivers at that point if you do that.
Yeah, we also have some guys that we think you should just straight up avoid that I think we should talk about, whether it's just their
Yeah.
ADP or just in general. My first guy that I think you should just straight up avoid drafting at all possible causes is a guy that if you were to say this 2 years ago, you would have been laughed out of the room, and that's Austin Eckler.
Yep.
To me, what we saw last year was just a complete fall off the cliff. And, you know, he was in a contract year. He needed to have a great year. And, you know, is that completely all his fault? No, probably not. The Chargers were a mess last year, but he's going to a Commanders team where he has a rookie quarterback. He has another young running back that he's going to be competing with in Brian Robinson. I just don't think in he's gonna have enough in the tank anymore. We see running backs once they've fallen off a cliff, a
Yeah.
lot of times they don't climb back out of it. And I think we've ultimately seen Austin Eckler reach that falling point. And, you know, Cliff Kingsbury, is he going to be able to maximize him? Is Jaden Daniels going to feel comfortable with him? And just that offensive line in front of him, he's pretty much strictly just a receiving back. And I don't know if Jaden Daniels is going to feel comfortable just going to him, especially if he's not going to be that same level of a player that he once was. So for me, at an ADP of 78, he's one of those guys where he's being looked at as a late seventh, early eighth round pick. I'm if he's there on the free agency market and you don't love and you just want to get one more extra back, sure, maybe consider it, but I am steering pretty clear of an Austin Eckler.
Yeah, yeah. Like if you can get him on the free agency wire, then it might be worth it. Or, if you're filling out your bench in the very last rounds and he's sitting there and you want to take a gamble because as you said, he's primarily receiving back. Cliff Kingsbury does do some unique things, so I could see Washington using Austin Eckler almost as a slot receiver type of guy because they are lacking in the depth at receiver as well. So we might still see something unique out of him, but he definitely won't be putting up the numbers that we were used to seeing 2-3 years ago from him.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's so I agree. Definitely one you want to avoid. You don't want to be taking him in the top 10 rounds. Like maybe at the end, if you're trying to round out your bench and you want to gamble on somebody, those are the picks to gamble with. But if he's still there at that point, you might be able to just pick him up off the free agency wire.
He's one of those guys where you have your top two running backs, you have your third running back, and you're looking at going, I need a fourth just to truly feel comfortable, and everyone else that's kind of was that I was targeting got picked ahead of me, and you're more or less taking him for the name recognition more than anything. But yeah, other than that, he's your RB4 if you are going to run a team with four running backs.
Yeah, he's like your backup flex essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you're not even really comfortable even with that backup flex anyways.
Mhm. Yeah, first guys on my list, it's a 1-2 punch. It's Pittsburgh Steelers running backs, Najee Harris and Jalen Warren. They're both great. You know, they both have the potential to produce. The issue is you're not going to know week in and week out which one of them is going to have the big week.
Yeah.
You've got Najee Harris with an ADP of at 60, so looking at him in the 6th round, 7th round, and Jalen Warren's sitting at 90, so ninth round, 10th round. I don't like either of those. I was big on Najee Harris last year. I drafted him fairly early, I think in the 8th or 9th round. I ended up dropping him to free agency because he just was not producing week in and week out. This is a contract year for both of these guys in a new offense with Arthur Smith. We're not sure who's going to be the feature, what's going to happen. Will both of them still be there at the end of the year? These are both risky picks. And so I would, much like Austin Eckler, if you want to gamble on one of them with a very late pick, go for it. Otherwise, I would leave them to the free agency wire and pick them up in situation of an injury. If one of them goes down or one of them gets traded away, then yes, jump in there and scoop the other because he will then become the point getter for that team. But as it stands with them splitting the carries pretty much 50-50, you don't know which one of them is going to be getting the touchdowns or the yards week in and week out. It's too big of a gamble for me.
And one more point is the play caller in Arthur Smith. I know he is the offensive coordinator, and this is one of the discussions that we've had of we know what Arthur Smith was when he was the OC in Tennessee with Derrick Henry and that offense with Ryan Tannehill. But we also saw the last 3 years of what Arthur Smith was as a play caller in Atlanta. And I
Yep.
you know my thoughts on Arthur Smith as an OC. I am not convinced. I would take a lot of people over Arthur Smith just because
And to be fair, the Steelers tried. There were a lot of guys that didn't want to coach in the cold weather.
which is yep. And so yeah, I understand that if it's both guys are going to seemingly put up decent numbers, but again, that point of you don't know which guy is going to be the guy each week,
Yeah.
because it really is one of those things where one guy has a decent game where he gets 70 yards and a touchdown, and the other it just gets nothing. And then there's also the games where neither guy produces anything, which is the other issue.
Yeah, I mean the tough thing there is that was based on a Matt Canada offense, which was, we think Arthur Smith was bad. Like Arthur Smith looks like a god play caller compared to Matt Canada.
Oh,
That's
it's it's night
absolutely
and day.
insane to say, right?
Yeah,
And so that's where I say you might be able to gamble on one of these guys because we've seen Arthur Smith be able to call an offense where a guy breaks rushing records.
yeah.
Unfortunately, he's got two really good running backs, so it's going to be tough for either of them to top that 2,000 mark. If you could combine them, that's great because I expect both of them to be probably in that 9 to 1,100 yards rushing. So, I mean, thinking about it, if it was one guy, you're looking at an 1,800 yard rusher. But it's going to be split between two. It's tough.
Yeah. The next guy on my list is James Conner for the Arizona Cardinals. And the only reason why I have this is because of who they drafted in Trey Benson. Trey
Yep.
Benson was my number one running back coming into this year's draft. Ends up falling to the Cardinals. I believe it was middle of the second round, if not the third round. They got an absolute steal in this kid from Florida State. To me, I go James Conner. He was a good running back the last couple of years. He's still going to get his touches. It's just Trey Benson is going to be viewed. He's going to get a little bit of a slower start, but once he gets going, it's going to be Trey Benson is going to get more of the snaps. He's going to get more of the yards. And, as good as of a story as James Conner has been throughout his entire football career, I unfortunately look at his ADP at 69 and go, To me, that is just way too rich for a guy that's going to realistically be losing a lot of his snaps, especially as the season goes on. And, James Conner definitely was more of your yards for points type of guy as opposed to getting a handful of touchdowns. And it's really unfortunate for James Conner, but that Cardinals team with all of those picks, they just went, we're gonna get this guy younger, this and that. And with Kyler Murray back, they're gonna want the younger running back to kind of take more of the workload. So for me, I just go, the awesome story that is James Conner. I say, just it's probably an avoid because Trey Benson, the rookie running back, we know how reliant this league uses their rookie running backs, and especially when you have a good one like Trey Benson, it's going to be hard for me to say you got to pick up, a James Conner.
It's tough. And you read my mind. The second guy on my list is also James Conner. I've been high on him year in, year out because he's been a staple. Yep. You can rely on him to get about 1,000 yards, handful of touchdowns. He's going to be consistent.
Yes.
But again, Trey Benson coming in there, that's going to affect the workload he has. He's going to lose some snaps to him. And if Trey Benson shows those flashes, he's just going to lose more and more of those touches, and it's just going to be too risky. It's something that if you're really desperate and hard up and you don't have your running back room filled up yet, take James Conner, sure, but that's with the intention of watching the free agency wire for one of these other running backs that isn't a starter yet, but might climb into the realm. Or if, taking James Conner and then grabbing Trey Benson off of the free agency wire to sit on your bench as well, so that when one takes over, you drop the other one out. But yeah, James Conner, I love him. He's, like you said, great football story, great football player. He's just not going to be able to put up the same numbers with Trey Benson breathing down his neck now.
And it's really unfortunate, but that just kind of ultimately is the unfortunate situation of the running back position. Sometimes it's a young man's position, and
Yep.
with how long he's been playing at the position, the amount of miles and dings that he's had to take throughout his career, because he's been injured a handful of times throughout his NFL career, and he's been really good, but even last year we said he was good. Was he great? No. And with this offense getting better,
yeah, he had a lot of adversity last year. He had to carry that team essentially until Kyler Murray returned.
Yeah,
and so that, I think, was really tough on him, and I think that wore him out a lot. So as from a team perspective, for the Cardinals, this is a great thing because you're going to be able to take some of that load off of James Conner. But from a fantasy perspective, you're not going to want probably either of those guys on your fantasy team because they're going to be splitting that workload.
Yeah.
And that brings me to the third that I've got on mine, and that is a similar situation to what I mentioned with Pittsburgh, and it's the other AFC North team. That's Cincinnati Bengals. You've got Joe Mixon, and they signed Zach Moss as well, who was lights out when Jonathan Taylor was not playing with the Colts last year. And so you're looking at Joe Mixon, who has been a perennial feature back for the Cincinnati Bengals. He's been consistent and able to get it done. But now you're bringing in Zach Moss, who is going to arguably take half the snaps away from him. Because I don't see why you wouldn't allow Zach Moss to have a substantial amount of those carries because he was so good. And so you've got Joe Mixon at an ADP around 47.
I do have to stop you right here.
Yeah.
Joe Mixon's with Houston.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't see that. When I was looking yesterday, it still had him listed as with Cincinnati.
I'm just trying to find him on this list that we have here. Joe Mixon, yeah, he's the 16th running back, ADP of 47. Yeah, and he's with the Houston Texans.
Oh, okay. Well, never mind that then.
I
didn't see that. I didn't see that move happen.
Yeah, when you first started talking about this, and the Cincinnati Bengals, for whatever reason I heard Chase Brown and Zach Moss, and I was sitting back going like, I can understand where he's coming from with this, but then I was sitting back going like, wait, did he say Joe Mixon?
Yeah,
Did he?
I did not realize Joe Mixon left Cincinnati. I thought he was still there.
Yeah, no, he got
Oh damn.
traded this off season, but yeah, yeah, it's I kind of understand where you're coming from. Zach Moss coming in, Chase Brown also there, but yeah,
With Chase Brown, that's a totally different story in my opinion. If it was Joe Mixon, what I was saying stands. If Zach Moss and Chase Brown, I think Zach Moss will be the feature guy, and he will.
without a doubt.
Yeah, he will do some great things there. Like I said, I completely missed that trade where he went to the Texans.
Yeah,
Yeah,
all good,
just
my friend.
yeah.
The
So
only
yeah,
other
I mean, other than that, any others that I'm concerned about, it basically boils down to that two running back, three running back room sets. So there's other teams around the league where you're gonna want to be cautious which running back you're taking. The Chicago Bears come to mind,
Yep,
the Seattle Seahawks. There's a lot of teams that have that tandem running back.
that running back by committee room.
Exactly, and so you're going to be gambling on which one you take and hoping that he emerges as the feature guy for them and has some great games, because otherwise you're going to run the risk of having a week where a guy's putting up 0 points for you.
Yeah, the only other running back that I have on my choose to avoid list is Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard is going from the Cowboys, where this last year he was supposed to be this super stellar running back, and he wasn't. We want to talk about busts, and like I know you talked about Bijan Robinson earlier in this, where you said he was a bust for the Atlanta Falcons in what he did, but Tony Pollard was a horrendous bust last year in his year, and then going over to Tennessee, especially for the contract that they
Yeah.
gave him. I look at him and go, he's going from a Cowboys offense that had a really good offensive line and was very running back friendly in the ability to open up holes. He's now going to a Tennessee Titans offensive line that is rivaling to be one of the worst in the NFL. And then not only that, he's also in a wide receiver room that is going to be demanding catches and passes towards them. And I think at the ADP of 81 for Tony Pollard, I'm a pretty clear avoid in that, just because
Oh
if
yeah.
he couldn't make it work in Dallas, where he had that offensive line and he had Dak Prescott throwing to CeeDee Lamb and he had Brandon Cook, I don't know how well he's going to be able to succeed, especially with Tajay Spear also being there in Tennessee. And Tajay Spear is someone I really, really like as a running back. I just sit back and go, to me, that is just a nope, no thank you. No thank you, sir. I am happy to pass on Mr. Tony Pollard.
Oh yeah, I agree 100% pass on him. He wasn't even on my radar. Like if it came to a point where I'm looking at Tony Pollard on my list, if any of the guys I mentioned, Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, James Carter, any of those are available, I'm taking them over
Oh,
Tony Pollard.
totally.
Like
Totally.
I did not have faith in Tony Pollard to be the feature guy. He is an excellent number two. When there's already somebody there in front of him, he's shown that he can be explosive coming in on minimal snaps. But when he's your feature guy, he's not able to get it done.
Yep. Now moving over to the guys that we potentially think are sleepers in this one. They might not be your number one running back. They might not be your number two running back, but they could be a number three that is a flex position player,
Hmm.
or someone that over the course of the year could potentially be someone that sneaks into that number two role for your team. And my number one guy in this particular list is David Montgomery. He has an ADP of 67. And I know I talked about Jahmyr Gibbs getting much more of a workload this year, but one of the points that you brought up is that David Montgomery is going to be used heavy in that red zone offense. He's still going to be able to get yards. He's going to put up a decent amount of numbers every single week. I think he's going to be able to get you 10 to 15, points per week just in that offense behind Jahmyr Gibbs. He's not going to be the feature guy this year. He's still
Mhm.
going to get you a bunch of touchdowns. And if he's your flex position, and especially at that running back spot, you're looking at that going like, okay, like I have my top two running backs and they're going to be able to do this. And at the ADP of 67, man, that just feels like if you can get him in the early stages of the seventh round, that as your flex or your number three guy, that's an absolute win in my books.
Yeah, yeah, that'll be a good pickup if you can get him there. That still might be a little bit high to be grabbing a flex guy already. You're probably looking at only getting your number two at that point. But no, I definitely agree. I like David Montgomery and what he brings to, especially the touchdown side of things.
Yep.
My first sleeper is much further down, and that's Cleveland Browns running back Jerome Ford. I haven't heard a lot about Nick Chubb. I'm not sure if he's set to be back to start this year, if he's going to play again at all. But like that was a pretty horrible injury. And it's the second time he's had it. I don't think he's going to be the same. I think Jerome Ford with an ADP of 128. So you're looking at like 13th round, 14th round, somewhere around there. He could be a really good sleeper that you could scoop up that could potentially end up being the starting running back for the Cleveland Browns on an offense that often struggles to find yards and ends up handing the ball off a lot anyway. And
Yeah.
so we saw it at the end of last year. Jerome Ford was starting to make a bit of a push and then had a bit of injury issues himself, and was splitting some of those carries with, I believe, Kareem Hunt at that time. I don't think Kareem Hunt is on the team anymore. I believe he's a free agent currently.
Yeah,
And
I'm not
so,
exactly sure where Kareem Hunt is. I would imagine he's still with the Browns. I can't confirm nor deny that, and I'm not gonna
fair.
spend the time to look at it here
No.
at this exact moment. But yeah, no, Jerome Ford. Yeah, he's one of those guys where even if Nick Chubb is back, I think the Browns are looking at Chubb saying, "Listen, you're not a young man anymore. You need to
Yeah.
have split carries because when you are healthy, you are still one of the very best running backs in the league, but we need you to be healthy come January."
Yeah.
And Jerome Ford, I think Nick Chubb will still probably miss time at the beginning stages of the year because, again, second time he's dealing with this injury. Those are not easy injuries to ever
Hmm.
come back from, especially when you are a featured back that has already had a lot of usage against you. So yeah, nice little 12th round pick. That would probably not be a bad for your running back number 3 or your flex running back type
Yeah.
situation. Yeah, yeah, know what you mean.
Yeah. Definitely. Did you have any other sleepers that you were looking at?
Yeah, I had one more, and I have another one if we want to do three. But my next one is Javonte Williams, the running back with the Denver Broncos. The Broncos have Sean Payton. We know
Hmm.
Sean Payton is a very, very inventive play caller. Javonte Williams was a damn good back last year before some injuries caught up, and I think having Bo Nix as the starting quarterback this year and maybe a little bit of more experienced weapons on the offense in terms of the receiving games, they're going to rely on him a little bit more heavily. And with what we've seen from this young man, he's shown that he can be a workhorse back. And I don't think he's going to necessarily get you 20 plus points every single week, but for someone to be a steady 10 to 15 with maybe a touchdown or maybe a little bit more here and there, I don't think he's going to get much lower than that. I think he's a solid option for a Denver Broncos team that right now is just trying to figure a lot of stuff out. And when you have a running back that you can rely on while you're in this period, he's going to get a lot of work. And when it starts to get closer to the end of the year, the known knowledge is that you're probably going to have the box a little bit more stacked. But if you're Sean Payton, you're also hoping that Bo Nix at that point is a little bit more seasoned in the NFL, and more teams are going to have to worry about what Bo Nix is being capable of doing in terms of the passing game, and that starts to open up more holes for Javonte Williams. Again, I think he's going to have a good, strong start to the year. He's going to have a little bit of a slower middle portion of the year, but then he's also going to have what I think could probably be a nice, decent back half of the year as well.
Yeah, and what's his ADP right now?
His ADP is sitting at 76. So I think it's
8th round.
yeah, 7th, 8th round. If you can somehow get him in the 9th round, because I feel like a lot of people are probably going to end up sleeping on him a little bit more, because he's one of those backs that's not as well known. So if he ends up falling to like the 9th, 10th round, you're going to get yourself what I believe could potentially be a pretty decent and cheap steal in the draft. And again, he's not going to be one of those guys that's going to win you your week, but he's just going to be a guy that's going to constantly give you points.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And Denver doesn't really have much to start the season outside of a run game. So I really like that one for sure. I only have one more, and this is like a way out of left field sleeper that I think could turn into something. You might not even have to draft him. He is likely going to be sitting there on the free agency wire, just somebody to throw on your bench in case the New England Patriots season goes the way I think it's going to, and that's Antonio Gibson. Zeke Elliott is out. Ramondre Stevenson is their number one now. They brought Antonio Gibson in as the number two. For myself, Stevenson didn't really impress me much last year, to be honest with you. And this Patriots team is looking to find a new identity. They've got Drake May now. You know, they got a new head coach. They're going a totally new direction. If Stevenson struggles, Antonio Gibson could get a shot. And I think Antonio Gibson was a incredibly gifted running back coming out of college. He was wasted in Washington. It was a terrible team at that time. And
They drafted a young guy to basically take that role from him anyways in Brian Robinson. Right? So yeah.
And I feel like they did him dirty in Washington. And so this is a sleeper that I could see. You know, his ADP is 153, so like 16th round. Yeah. I really think he's probably just going to fall right out of the draft, and you could likely just pick him up, sit him on your bench if you've got the depth to be able to do so, and wait out the season. Because if things go badly for the Patriots, they're losing by a lot of points, a lot of games, they're going to be running the ball a bunch. And if Stevenson doesn't work out, Gibson could get you a lot of garbage points late in the season.
Yeah, I completely hear you on that one. It is going to be a decent player to potentially pick up later, potentially off of the free agency wire list. I have one guy that is a rookie that I want to talk about, and that's Will Shipley, the running back for the Philadelphia Eagles. He is kind of like a poor man's Christian McCaffrey. When he was at Clemson, he played in a very similar style, and I know with Saquon he's going to be there, but with Shipley, he's one of those guys where I think every single time he's going to touch the ball, he's going to do some good things, because he is really shifty and he does have that really good receiving threat out of the backfield. It's just the main problem is that Saquon Barkley is the featured back there, and he can really do everything. But Will Shipley, you know, he has an ADP of 212. So you can easily find him in the free agency market. And if Saquon Barkley gets hurt, Will Shipley will be a very, very good player to pick up, because, again, shifty back with receiving elements in his game. he could potentially be a little bit of a steal. But again, with Saquon there, it's going to be hard to justify ever playing him unless Saquon Barkley has a little bit of an injury or is out completely. But yeah, just one of those rookies that I kind of wanted to throw out there that could be a little bit of a, yeah, that might be a decent pickup.
No, that definitely makes sense because Saquon has had injury issues in the past, and so that's not outside the realm of possibility. I agree completely. You'll likely be able to get him on the free agency wire. That's one that hadn't hit my radar, so I'm glad you brought it up actually, because if I see Saquon Barkley go down, that's exactly who I'm going to be going and nabbing off the free agency wire and throwing onto my bench to be a flex guy or just to see what happens. Because who knows if he's able to come in and just replicate the numbers that, say, DeAndre Swift was putting up last year. Why not?
Now, I will preference that with Will Shipley, I really need to see his preseason. I need to see how he's performing in the NFL just because, being a very good running back in Clemson in the college level is a different beast coming in. And, he was a late draft pick. So it is one of those things where I'm more cautious with it. I'm just going, I want to see his preseason. If he has a really good preseason, then that is one of these situations where, you should definitely always keep an eye on this guy. I'm not saying have him on your roster, but definitely, that little favorite tab, you hit him as a favorite and just, if Saquon, even if he doesn't get injured and he's out of the game, it's one of those things where if you hear like, oh, he's on the injury report this week, you might like the idea of just bringing him up and just seeing what he does and, seeing what happens. So, yeah.
No, that's definitely a good addition. I like that one.
But yeah, that is where we are going to end this episode off here today, guys. Thank you all very much for watching. Make sure to check back for all of our content. But for Sterling, I'm Brendan, and we are saying peace.